to introduce. Today, I am ecstatic to introduce the Freedom Socialist Party's International Secretary, Stephen Durham, who will be our featured speaker for our discussion on Defying the Global Right, a socialist feminist perspective, in which he will discuss the urgency of the times that we are facing with economic and political attacks on the working class growing and the need for the leadership of a revolutionary party becoming more clear. And so, to serve this need, the Freedom Socialist Party is hosting a tour in our US branches because we understand that these attacks are not isolated to the growing number of communities under attack, immigrants, activists for Palestinian solidarity like Mahmoud Khalil, trans folks, and federal workers, not to mention the programs that are under attack that have helped elevate the working class, such as Medicaid and the various diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs that have helped integrate in excluded communities such as Black folks, other folks of color, women and queer folks into jobs that can let them prosper, within a capitalist system. And we connect these attacks with those that are happening globally, such as the international, as the international capitalist class is causing crises worldwide. So as our international secretary, Stephen is a vital representative in the Committee for International Recruitment. And this is where our party has developed ties with other revolutionaries in Mexico, Central and South America, and the Caribbean. He is also a member of our New York City branch, who ran for New York State Assembly in 1998 and ran for president alongside vice presidential candidate Cristina Lopez in 2012. And, not only those things, he somehow also found the time to write and support the writing of several important Freedom Socialist Party documents, including The Crisis of World Trotskyism, Perspectives from the Struggle for a Revolutionary Socialist Feminist Party. And so with all that having been said, take it away, Stephen.
Thank you, Christina. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Back in the Bay Area, little did I know when I arrived at the University of California, Berkeley as a teenager, that almost 6 decades later, I'd be sitting in this beautiful hall, and a beautiful hall with a political party that has almost just 1 year short of 5 decades of fighting the good fight here in what we called in the 60s, maybe you still call it the city, call it San Francisco. And I always came over here with like, oh my God, would I ever be able to live in this beautiful city? Because the Bay Area is not the city. But anyway, so I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad that you took your time on this beautiful spring day to come hear what the Freedom Socialist Party has to say. And I gave this talk in December in Seattle, and it was the day after the terrible regime of al-Assad, 20 decades, 20, 30, 25 years of a terrible regime in Syria fell. It was also in the wake of the discussion, the class consciousness given Luigi Mangione, and how people are coming forward with the horror of medical care in this country. So that whole aspect of a rise of class consciousness, we're seeing it. Then yesterday I opened the paper and the people of Korea managed to rise up and overthrew their president. And then I find out today that there were 5 million people, according to the Women's March, 5 million people on the street yesterday, including here in New York City and in New York here in San Francisco and in New York City. And there were in 1,300 different locations. So that makes me feel very positive. But as with the daily grind, when I open the paper, I always think of Charles Dickens opening line in the Tale of Two Cities, where he says it is the best of times and the worst of times. So they're the worst. The best of times is the rebellion we're seeing. The worst of times is what's happening to the most vulnerable, given what I like to call it the Musk-Trump juggernaut is doing. Going back to understanding Make America Great Again, that's nothing new. That began in 1986 when Patrick Buchanan ran for president, and his whole slogan was Make America Great Again. The same year, there was a very seminal, a very important document that was written from the right-wing mill, like the Heritage Foundation, called The Cultural Wars. And so, we've really been facing that. Also, if you step back even further, the 1970s, there was the rise of Anita Bryant to overturn, which was lesbian gay rights at the time. And luckily, the movement spoke up and her career was ruined. And I'm really glad. And, but
Pie in the face.
What?
Pie in the face.
Pie in the face. Thank you very much, Christina. And the other thing that happened at the same time was the save the family nationalism, which Phyllis Schlafly, that then turned in this period into the Dobbs decision in 2022, which overturned abortion. So that lays a little bit of the background for what I want to say today, which is defying the rise of the global right. I want to speak in certain sections, different sections. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the objective conditions that gave rise to the global right. Then I want to talk about the subjective factors in the rise of the global right, and then I want to talk about the fight back, and then I want to talk about what we can do. So the basis for the rise of the global right is the ongoing crisis of capitalism, which has actually capitalism has been in a downward spiral since the beginning of the last century. It was World War I that turned capitalism, that proved capitalism. The blood and the gore of World War I proved that capitalism could only solve itself by the destruction of lives, people, and now we see the environment. And it's been in a permanent crisis, and as I mentioned, it's been accelerated by the 1970s. And the FSP is here today in what has been an overall reactionary period since the civil rights movement, because we have found our way forward within the context of crisis and opportunity. We've talked a lot over the decades about crisis and opportunity, and actually the crisis has dominated, but we have been able to find the opportunities, and the opportunities have been, building a revolutionary party, but also doing that in alliance and defending the most oppressed, people of color, lesbian, gay, trans, LGBTQ plus people. And actually, at one point, the lesbian and gay movement at the time in the 70s and the 80s was extremely important to the party. And it was because of our socialist feminism that we really actually attracted lesbians and gays like myself to the party, which I joined in 1975. So there's been a lot of crisis, but I'm very optimistic because now I think there's also a huge amount of opportunity. So what is the nature of the crisis? It's a crisis of overproduction. Marxism talked about how the capacity to provide goods and services for people, to meet human needs, the capacity to do that is gone way beyond the capacity of people to consume, has gone. So capitalism at the end of the last century, really at the beginning of the last century, really began a downward spiral. And so there's a corresponding aspect to the crisis of overproduction is the crisis of underproduction. And we all know, or maybe you know by going to the market and buying eggs and the price of food and everything in your own lives, but actually the the wages since 1979, we're not talking about the gross wages, we're talking about the acquisitive power of wages. The purchasing power of wages have gone down. And with that, the conditions of people's lives have deteriorated. And I think that that's why, without a real alternative, they voted for Trump, and we'll get to that later. So another, I think, really important thing for us to understand is that all of this reactionary wave that we've seen has really had origins in the United States. You know, I mean, 1 million people were killed in 1985 in Indonesia, and they were political radicals because there was a large, you know, socialist and a large communist party. You know, the CIA, everything in this country has, the reactionary movements have really come from this country. And neoliberalism itself, neoliberalism began in what's referred to as the Chicago Boys, which was the University of Chicago, which was the way that capitalism was going to save itself. But also neoliberalism, it's important to understand that neoliberalism was also a part of the Condor CIA overthrowing the democratic movements within Latin America, the dictatorship of Brazil and other countries. But specifically, neoliberalism first got its start in Chile under the dictatorship, which was created by the CIA and the United States of General Pinochet. So we analyzed the rise of neoliberalism and wrote about it in this document, One Hemisphere Indivisible, published it, and described neoliberalism, and reached out to parties, as you mentioned, Christina, in our hemisphere, and built this Committee for Revolutionary International Regroupment. So, what is neoliberalism? It really it corresponds also to what's happening with Trump. It's a privatization of state assets, and Trump is now talking about privatizing the post office, the largest government employer in the whole country. And in Brazil, the post office has already been privatized. And in Brazil, Bolsonaro rose on Save the Children with sex education in schools. He was elected on the basis of that. That came right out of the Nita Bryant, campaign. So another thing of neoliberalism is slashing state intervention in the economic and social service sectors. And also neoliberalism got a great boost with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992, which finally fell because of capitalist encirclement and also the bureaucracy that was no longer really met the needs of the people. And the USSR fell partly because of technological development. You can't have a totalitarian state and have computers, and computers came along. Doesn't mean that it couldn't happen in the United States, but it'd be a whole nother phenomenon. At the time, it wasn't possible. And then we remember how they talked about the monopolar world. Like now it was like the American century. Well, that neoliberalism hasn't been able to really hold on to all the power, because now we have competing powers with China and Russia, as in our view in the Freedom Socialist Party, as being imperialist competitors, not as strong and not as big and not as powerful as the United States, but nonetheless competitors. And neoliberalism gave rise to the billionaire class, the greatest transfer of wealth ever in human history, from the working class to the super rich. It also gave rise to wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the longest U.S. war ever in U.S. history, ever in American history. And it gave rise to unbridled destruction of the environment. Today, there are more people, more migrants are on the move because of war, but also because of destruction of the environment, that they can't live in parts of Africa because of the destruction of the environment. But ultimately, neoliberalism stalled. It couldn't solve the crisis of capitalism. So neoliberalism took, and capitalism, neoliberalism, capitalism, took a huge hit with the onset of the financial crisis in 2006. The greatest shakeup on Wall Street since the crash of 1929 initiated the Great Depression. And within that, in the last 2 days, $6 trillion worth of value in the house of cards, which is the Wall Street, was lost. And ever since the capitalist crisis of 2006, the economy has not recovered. It got another shock with the abrupt downturn with the onset of the COVID pandemic. And the deep and unresolved crisis of capitalism is what gave rise to the global right. Also, even the total bailing out of the banks and bailing out of the auto industry and the too big to fail corporations didn't solve the problem. And then also the inflation came about. It's so hypocritical. Imperialism is so arrogant and hypocritical. It has spoken so negatively about Latin American countries when they try to provide social services by printing money and causing inflation. That's exactly what the United States did to bail out the big banks. They printed money and handed it over to banks, and then banks used it to charge interest. And there's a whole financialization of capital, which has nothing to do with the true value of anything. I want to digress here just for a moment about the tariffs, because I read this and it was very interesting yesterday in the paper. I mean, this is the opportunity. Is the guts of this rotten system is like coming out, and there's a real opportunity for those of us who want social change to those of us like in the Freedom Socialist Party and other people, but actually a group of people that want to be a collective brain for really understanding what the system is about. I learned something very interesting in the paper yesterday, which is that Trump's tariffs are only on consumable concrete goods, toothbrushes, computers, chips, things that you import that can actually you touch, but it's not on things the United States exports, which is a huge amount of technology information. And if you really put them two together, the United States wouldn't be being ripped off, because the difference between the trade deficit between what the United States exports to a country like Switzerland and what it imports from the country from Switzerland would be equal. So this is part of the whole 1984 game on people to make them believe that the United States is under it, that Trump wants us to believe, and Elon Musk wants to believe, that the United States is under attack and that we're being ripped off, where in fact, we're not being ripped off. We just don't have as much power. At the US ruling class just doesn't have quite the amount of power it had coming out of World War II. So getting back to the topic, so what is neoliberalism? It's a caustic mix of national chauvinism, Christian nationalism, racism, the great replacement theory, which is openly racist, and it's anti-Semitic on top of it. And there's a whole other contradiction that now Trump is saying he's defending against anti-Semitism, but he's promoting the Great Replacement Center, which is saying Jewish liberal people are opening the borders to change the racial composition of the United States to the detriment of white people. It's neoliberalism has a virulent aspect of attack on the LGBTQ and gender non-conforming people. It's an anti-feminist agenda beginning with the banning of abortion and the extending, and it's attack on the healthcare, and it's also attacked on the ably challenged, which we're witnessing on a daily basis. And it's also an attack on the Social Security network. But essentially, what one of the essential and main points that unites all the global right is the attack on immigrants. And the attack on immigrants is the attack on labor. And in order to survive, capitalism has to drive down the cost of labor. And that's exactly what Trump is trying to do. So let's turn to what's happening internationally. Well, in Europe, 6 different countries have hard right wing parties. In Germany has seen the rise of a hard right party called Alternative for Germany, and it just doubled its strength in the elections that took place at the end of last year. And today in Germany, there are actually physical attacks on leftists and progressives. In Russia, we have the Putin authoritarianism and the criminal invasion of Ukraine. In Latin America, Milei, in his first year after 1 year in office, has promoted policies driving the majority of the population below the official poverty line. In Brazil, there's a lot of support for Bolsonaro, who came to power on the coattails of the Trump administration. In El Salvador, we have a police state, an open police state, making a deal with Trump to accept immigrants. And we have a Nicaragua which challenged the United States in the 1970s, but now has a conservative dictatorial regime. Venezuela and Chavismo, which we had a lot of hope for at the beginning of the 21st century, now has a very repressive regime. And Cuba has lost its revolutionary internationalism completely because of the international crisis. In Asia and Asia Pacific, India has a very reactionary prime minister named Modi, who's a big friend of Trump and has been hosted at the White House. And there are right-wing parties in the Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, and Myanmar. In the Middle East, the Zionists are strengthened by the United States, including the Democrats and Trump. Under Netanyahu, Turkey has a very authoritarian regime, which treats the Kurds like black people are treated in this country. Kurds, who are the indigenous people of the Middle East. And then we have the rise of Muslim fundamentalism in the Middle East, with the full support of the Ayatollah-led theocracy in Africa, in Iran. And in Africa, there's a huge amount of conflict going on, a lot of it armed by imperialism, selling arms to both sides, and intervention in the terrible civil war that's going on in Sudan. And also we have the emergence of the passage of laws, anti-LGBTQ plus laws, that are actually fomented by the right-wing religious forces in the United States. So we have a crisis, a credit crisis, and a credit. There's, how has the system been able to limp along for so long in a relatively reactionary period? It's done it with credit, to the point now where in the United States, 65% of the people here do not have $1,000 in savings for an emergency. And 22% of the people in the United States spend the majority of their income on housing. So all of that gives rise, without a strong left alternative, all of that gives rise to the global right. So let's move to the subjective factors. Well, a major subjective factor is the shift by social democrats and the Democratic Party over decades to the right. So, and why? Because they believe in the system, including the woman who is touted as being such a great feminist um, on the Supreme Court, who, because she believed in the system, she did not step down. And then that allowed Trump to pack the court because the belief in the system, they moved to the right because of belief in the system and the fear of the people. And that is exactly what maintains the capitalist status quo. But it's not just happening with the Democrats in this country, it's happening with the Social Democrats in Europe. I was talking to a Danish woman on IWD in New York City who was saying that, yes, we have a liberal government, but actually our policies when it comes to immigrants, other people come to Denmark to see how we're dealing with the immigrants and how we have a social democratic government when it comes to immigrants, though we're very actually repressive, and she was actually ashamed of that. But the other subjective factor is the weakness of the labor movement. And the labor movement has, I was a hotel worker for many years, and I've just seen, from the 1970s to today, despite the fact that there's been organizing, especially among public workers, especially among people of color, and especially among women of color, in the labor movement, still the labor movement has never taken up the battle of organizing the unorganized. And that's a real problem. And they, over and over again, they deliver hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Democrats in every election cycle. But maybe that's changing now, because there was labor out here in San Francisco. There was in Seattle, the Labor Council endorsed the demonstrations, yesterday at the initiative of the Freedom Socialist Party and an organization which we built, which is a multi-union grassroots organization called OWL. And this organization, which is the FSP, started over 2 decades ago, went to the Labor Council in Seattle, and they got the Labor Council to endorse the demonstration yesterday. And so labor is so important. Labor has to move. But there's also been the weakness and disorientation of the left. And that has also been because we are under so much pressure here. There's so many ways that the system, especially in those of us who are radicalized in the 60s, if you have brains and if you're intelligent, you get compromised. You go into the university campuses. That's what happened to a lot of people who were radicalized in the 60s. University campus or businesses say, "Oh, you're really smart. We need you." The smartest people actually, so much of what we need, what our understanding of the system and the system's understanding of us is very, very real. And that's where from McCarthyism to the attacks on the Communist Party and the radicals and even the members of the Trotskyist movement, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. They know that we can organize, and people learn in the movement how to organize, and then anybody who can, they try to absorb them. So, but the weakness of the left has been this kind of very unsophisticated politics, which actually has come up in the relationship to many situations, the war in Iraq also, but also recently in Ukraine, and also with the Middle East and what was happening in Syria. In other words, it's a very simple formula, which actually comes from Stalinism, which is that you can only that comes from the Cold War, which is that there's only two sides to a question, and that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's called campism. And this is a very simple, politics is much more complex than that, and yet it's allowed a whole sector of the left to really abandon the complexity of truly trying to change you know, what's happening here in the United States. And so that's another problem. But I think that you have to, and that kind of politics has led to tail-ending regimes in Nicaragua, in Maduro, and tail-ending meaning approaching without any kind of criticism, only seeing that the United States is against these regimes. Also in Cuba, Iran, the al-Assad who fell, and just last December. But now there is emerging resistance and fight back. You know, I mentioned the large rallies yesterday, which is really important. And labor is beginning to move, and labor did move. It began in the newspaper here that I know we'll talk about later, but in this article, the article of the latest issue is talks about the teachers, you know, starting, you know, teachers organizing in 2018. Anyway, and so you know, labor is beginning to move, and also the federal workers. I mean, who would have thought that federal workers would be demonstrating in Washington D.C.? But they're being thrown out, and you know why they're being thrown out? So that's also to attack labor, so that you have desperate people on the street that will take any kind of job. That's why they're throwing out that's why they're deporting the immigrants, and that's why he says he's going to deport the immigrants, is because they want to lower the wages completely, so that desperate people will take the jobs. But also the other thing I want to say is that there's also a plan here. It's my opinion. We'll see if it's true or not. Why are they cutting back on the state? Because they want to invest in other things. They want to invest in war. They want to invest in AI to carry out war. And that's exactly, and so that's why they're cutting the state, everything in the state. So they have the funds. They say, oh, well, it's because we can't have debt. Well, it's not just because we can't have debt. They have their policies for what they want to invest in, and it is in technology. Okay, so many other things are happening. So now I want to get to, so we have 10 minutes more. Okay, thank you. 25 minutes. Wow. So I must have talked. Okay, this is all good. Okay, so fired up. Ain't gonna take it no more. You know, I have to tell you, I'm gonna digress a little, but I might need a few more minutes. But I would digress. You know, when I was young, they would all tell everybody, "Oh, I don't have a price. Oh, I can't be bought off. No, I can't be bought off." And now I say, "Yes, I do have a price, but it is so high. It's so high." And that's what you get from being in the trenches, you know, and that's what you get from going to demonstration like yesterday. I wasn't there, but other demonstrations where you really find your humanity in relationship to other people. We find humanity in solidarity, and that's the main message, you know. So there's a lot of fight back going on. They had the largest demonstrations ever in Argentina, commemorating the anniversary of the fall of the dictatorship on March 24th. Millions in the street. Trump, Milei, the president of Argentina, a total neoliberal, radical in the negative sense, went to Switzerland, Davos, and heard Trump, and came back and tried to overturn the identity law, which allows for gay marriage and gender affirmation. And then grassroots women organized along with the LGBTQ plus community, massive demonstrations, that 2 million people, that wasn't just in Buenos Aires, which is a big urban center, but happened in small towns, which was a huge development. Mexico, the teachers, 1.1, the largest union in Mexico, has taken to the streets in the last 2 weeks and overthrown one aspect of the neoliberal education reform. So people are moving. Ukraine, the war goes on, the people are fighting. Gaza, the Palestinians are still fighting against great odds. So there's lots of hope. What we need are united front. And a united front, first of all, has to be led by the working class. And that means there's a real role for the left and the organized working class and labor and the left. It has to be organized by the working class. It can't be organized by the capitalist class. In other words, I think of, in my mind, a popular front is when NMSNBC and everybody says, defend democracy. Democracy. This democracy built on slavery, this democracy built on electoral college, which is aimed at slavery. This democracy which makes it almost impossible for a party like the Freedom Socialist Party to run an effective campaign. So we don't want to. We just need to recognize, not to say it's totally wrong that people feel that way, but to understand that that isn't what we really need. What we need is a united front that defends concrete, that defends people's lives, and also united front which brings together a group of people to decide democratically when they're going to march, what they're going to march, what is the main slogan that'll bring everybody together. And then political radicals have a real role in that, and that's where the Freedom Socialist Party comes in, because then we can talk to people about what we need beyond the united front. So we need a united front. We also need a labor parties. And a labor party, and there's no contradiction between a revolutionary party like the Freedom Socialist Party and a labor party. In a labor party, we would fight for the most radical program possible. But also, we understand that a labor party would be the beginning of the working class feeling its own power in the electoral arena. In a country where people are still basically think that politics is about elections, we need to give them an alternative. And then we could organize within the Labor Party and not just be for all the workers, for all the oppressed. We could say we're going to defend immigrants, we're going to defend the unorganized. We could pressure the labor movement to organize the unorganized. So it would be a place where you could really raise class consciousness, and that's really what's needed. Many years ago, when I joined the Freedom Socialist Party, the founder of the Freedom Socialist Party that came, it was really great. Here I am, multi-generational, with people in this room, and that was a great attraction for the Freedom Socialist Party. And the founder of the Freedom Socialist Party was like 20 years older than me. There she is, Clara Fraser, 20 years older than me. And she said at one point, she said, if you bring all the issues together, it leads to a class analysis. Well, now all the issues have come together and we still are lacking the class analysis because the system has co-opted all the issues. And that's where the controversy around everything that the system touches, it turns into its opposite. But so when I became radicalized, it was like I wanted freedom. I wanted total liberation, and so it's been a very sophisticated divide and conquer, massaging of these issues to take away all the class analysis. And our job is to understand, is to infuse it, and also to understand that people themselves, when they go to the grocery store and look at what it costs, what things cost and what money they have, that there is a class understanding among people. So, but the Labor Party we need slogans in the Labor Party, and that's a whole nother thing, because a revolutionary party like the Freedom Socialist Party needs to have, it depends on connection to the people that necessarily aren't us. And the way a party done this, and the way history has shown a party can do this, is through slogans that correspond to people's needs. So in a Labor Party, we would say, Labor Party now, fight for the working class. Labor Party now, the Dems have sold us out. Labor Party now, the Dems don't deliver. And on the basis of that, we can start to engage, we can engage with people and achieve what really is needed, which is the feeling, the understanding, the feeling and the understanding of the working class that they can only liberate themselves. It's a real problem. I've seen it in my labor work, everybody wants a bureaucrat to take care of it, or they come to me as the activist and say, well, you take care of it. Everybody is shuffling off on other people. Well, in this configuration, the working class has to understand, it is the only force that can liberate itself. And it is possible. It's happened in the past. But the other thing too that I think is important is to face is that the crisis of capitalism really presents the threat of fascism. And okay, Trump is not a fascist in my opinion. He's a pragmatist. He just wants to make a deal and have it be over. But there are people in the Trump administration that really have the understanding of class and understanding that, as I was talking to a comrade here the other day, in order to put the genie back in the bottle, they're going to have some real heavy repression and maybe even turn to fascism. But they're going to have to deal with us and our determination to struggle and our determination to understand the lessons of history. And that's another point where Trotskyism comes into question. Is Trotskyism is understanding, first of all, the revolution has to be international. And that means it's very important what happens in the center of world imperialism, in the centers of world imperialism. It's very important what happened in Russia with the fall of the Soviet Union. It wasn't a good thing. It was a good thing and it was a bad thing, but it was also not a good thing. It also wasn't a good thing that China went capitalist. And also the crisis is here. And what happens in the United States and Western Europe, where the right is rising, are all extremely important. The U.S. revolution is extremely, extremely important in terms of fighting fascism. And when our historic, so that's one aspect, is internationalism, and the other aspect is the fact that you can't really build socialism in one country. In fact, what you need is something that we're trying to do in the Committee for Revolutionary National Recruitment, and I think I'm winding down. What we're trying to do in the Committee for Revolutionary National Recruitment, which is we need to know our co-thinkers throughout the world. Our co-thinkers throughout the world have faced terrible conditions, like Nazism really killed a lot of the people who adhered to our ideas, but we need an international space, an international working class to bring together all the struggles. And so then we decided that because of the crisis in the U.S. left, because of the problems of Stalinism and bureaucratization, and because of the pragmatism among many people who call themselves leftists, and the opportunism saying, oh, well, all we can do now is things that are abstract, like build a socialist movement, not talk about power. We have to take power. Workers have to take power. We're not there yet, but we believe that to really end the fascist threat, you have to have the working class in power, because fascism is always there as the last card. So we decided to reach out to co-thinkers in Latin America, and that is where we established the Committee for Revolutionary International Recruitment. And this, there are many things that we share with our comrades in career. One of them is the necessity to build the political leadership of women in each of our countries. And it's very interesting how that has changed since we established the group in 2013. Since 2013 to 2022, there has been a whole flowering of the feminist movement in Latin America, which has been very, very enlightening to us and gives us a lot of hope. And then also we believe another thing that is really key in our international revolutionary national recruitment effort is the belief in the working class in each of our countries. We don't believe in the bureaucrats. We don't believe in the reformists. We believe in our own classes. And I was at a meeting in Argentina at once, and it became so clear that that's one of the things we really we believe in. The other thing is that among us in the Committee for Revolutionary International Regroupment is that the central role of the United States. I mean, these are countries, Mexico, the longest border between a poor country and a rich country, totally dominated so much by the United States, even invaded by the United States in the last century and the 2 centuries ago. That really what happens in the United States is really key for their liberation, for what they faced. And so the real understanding that the American working class is really very important. And it's a little disorienting, I think, it's a little disorienting because in this regroupment effort, our comrades in Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil were so excited about all the labor. I mean, workers voted down contracts. The bureaucrats shoved it through, but there was so much resistance among the UPS and the Boeing workers. And then you see Starbucks and you see young people, and it's all just, really the whole cauldron, and the fact that young people want unions. I mean, I was in a union in the 1980s, and it was like, oh, well, we'll just buy a house and have some babies and everything will be fine. Which I'm not against people buying houses. I'm not against people having babies, but also it's also very important to combine, your life, have 2 careers, your working career and also your political career. And that's what's so important. It's so important. So anyway, the understanding of that really what happens in the United States is extremely important. So I just want to end by saying that I have always found out, and it's like, it doesn't take much to keep the fires burning. But when you fight, you win, because you win in the fight. Some people say, oh, well, how can you be a socialist? Has never really been a socialist. I said, are you gonna give up on the dream and on the possibility? And it's not just a dream or a possibility, it's based on the concrete things that people are facing right now. And we need socialism, and I think we can achieve it. And I look forward to your comments in the discussion, your questions and comments, and thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stephen. If I were on Zoom, there would be a crap ton of fire emojis that I would put in the chat.
Thank you, Christina.
All right. And then to talk briefly about how